welcome to Mark's Motivational Podcast, another Motivational Thursday. Today I'm delighted to be joined by a great guest again, Garry Coles. I had a pleasure of meeting in the Irish Hypnosis Convention there earlier on the year, and Gary's stuff is amazing. So he does parts work. I had the pleasure of taking his course there recently. Does amazing work. So Gary, thanks a lot for joining me this morning.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and it was great to have met you in Ireland.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, thanks so much. So we probably start off the podcast. If you want to tell the listeners a little bit of background, exactly what you do, would be a great place to start.
Yeah, okay. Well, I am a general hypnotherapist.
Yeah,
I've been a general hypnotherapist for over 20 years now. But what I'm known for around the world is hypno-oncology, and that's
mm,
essentially working with cancer patients.
yeah,
Now, my background for that was just well, the first part was sort of accidental. Just after I qualified as a hypnotherapist, word got out, and I had a phone call from the hospital cancer unit saying, "Oh, well, we've just heard you've qualified as a hypnotherapist. We used to have a hypnotherapist here, and they've left. Will you come and do some stuff in the hospital for us?" And my original idea was, I thought, "Oh, I'll go in there. I need experience. I've just qualified. I'll go in there for a few weeks, get experience, and disappear." It didn't quite work like that because I spent over 19 years there. So I probably worked with about over 2,500 cancer patients, between 2,500, 3,000 cancer patients. So I've developed a lot of approaches and sort of know what to do with them. And then I had a chance to be in the first cohort for a Master of Science degree in clinical hypnotherapy from the University of London, sorry, University of West London. And I decided I wanted to do medical research, which they said I was absolutely mad to do. And it did cause me a lot of ethics issues. But I persevered and I did quite a pioneering study. I did a study into pre-surgical hypnosis and the effects that had on recovery quality in breast cancer operations. And I was able to demonstrate it did and how and why. That sort of got out a little bit, so I started getting emails about, "Oh, you're a bit of an expert on working with cancer patients. Can you give me some advice?" Then I did a couple of podcast interviews. I was getting more emails, and then a few people were saying, "Oh, you ought to put a training course together to teach doctors, psychologists, and hypnotherapists how to work with cancer patients." And at that stage, I thought nobody's really going to be interested in that, and I was obviously wrong. And it really changed with the very first UK Hypnosis Convention. uh, they were advertising. They had a lot of star names from around the world, and they were actually advertising. They had the top 30 hypnotherapists in the world in London for the weekend, and they asked whether I'd speak on the bill. So I thought, well, that's not going to harm my reputation. And so I spoke on the bill, and I've been invited back every year since. Then I was asked whether I would like to speak at the world's biggest hypnosis convention, which is Hypnothoughts in Las Vegas. Next month, I will be speaking there, I think, for the eighth time. And then it sort of exploded. I did put a training course together, and both online and in person. I did a few courses in the UK, and since then it's pretty much exploded. I've written a script book for Hypno-Oncology. I'm currently writing an academic book on it. I've now taught, as mentioned, I'm teaching medical staff in Poland next weekend. I was teaching nurses recently in Iceland. I've taught psychologists in Bahrain, so I get all around the world. Present a lot of conferences. We were talking before we came on air. I think I've got about 8 or 9 this year that I'm presenting at globally. And yeah, so that's pretty much me. Oh, and another thing which was rather nice, getting recognised in America. One of the oldest conferences in the States that look after the industry is the Mid America Conference. And they have an awards dinner every year. And in 2024, they gave me the award of Medical Hypnotist of the Year in the US. So that's
wow,
not too shabby from being over here.
yeah, well, that's congratulations for that. Yeah, if you want to maybe share that book when it comes out as well, I'll put it on the show notes for people to
Yeah, I'm at the moment.
get
I've
as
just got
well.
a
Yeah,
hypno-oncology script book,
oh yeah,
which is
yeah,
available from my website, which is the hypno-oncology.com. You can see in the background.
oh great, yeah,
The one I'm doing at the moment is a hypno-oncology, sort of an academic book based on my training course. I'm not sure when that's coming out because there's been a bit of procrastination and running around doing conferences. So I've still got 3 chapters to do, and I've had 3 chapters to do for about the last year. And then after, obviously, once I finish that, it all needs to be edited, proofread, and
hmm,
whatever. So I think it will be a little while yet.
yeah. That's when the fun begins with all the
Yeah.
editing and stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well,
great.
I
Yeah,
actually have a very good editor.
oh, that's
I mean,
good.
she's
Yeah,
edited it to where we are at this stage. She is pretty much a full-time editor.
Mm.
and proofreader and so on. She's actually Canadian, but she's and based in Canada, but she is also a hypnotherapist, so that helps.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's great. No, well done to you. That's absolutely amazing. And can I just ask you as well? Could you maybe give one or two examples of people you've worked with before, like success stories that you've had recently, maybe just for the listeners?
Yeah, I think probably the most inspiring one I had
Yeah.
on the cancer patient front, because
Mm, yeah.
I mean, I obviously I do work with general stuff. I mean, for example, I work with sports performance, and I've worked with
Hmm.
people that have gone on to become world champions and
Wow.
player of the
Yeah.
season and things like that. But oncology is probably the stuff that people are interested in. I think probably one of the nicest one I did, or the most inspiring story I had, I worked with a lady. She was in her late 20s and very active lifestyle. She was into parachuting and doing all sorts of dangerous things and active things. And she was diagnosed with colon cancer. And she was told that it was that probably was very small, though she would have keyhole surgery, and then she'd better carry on life as normal. Well, unfortunately, they started off with the keyhole surgery and found that it had spread significantly, which hadn't come up on the scans. So they had to do a major operation. So they decided to change it while she was under. Did a major operation. They removed her entire colon. She had to have a colostomy. They broke all her ribs on one side to get everything out. So a huge amount of pain and shock when she came back. They also decided because it spread that she had to have some quite heavy duty chemotherapy. Her body reacted to that and she actually died twice and had to be resuscitated. And that was the first time I saw her. Just after she'd been resuscitated to the second time, she was in huge amounts of pain, shock, couldn't sleep, all the rest of it. So, and she was still in the hospital. So I was asked whether I'd go and work with her, and we started working on pain control. We started working on sleep issues, getting her over the psychological impact, and so on. Then she eventually got released from hospital and she worked with me as an outpatient for quite a while, again, dealing with sort of the life changes and things that were going on and so on. And then I pretty much lost contact with her. She seemed to be sort of fine. But she came back to me as a private patient about 3 years later. And she come back to me. She wanted sports performance. She wanted me to help her with her triathlon performances. So I think
Yeah.
that was a pretty successful one.
Right. And so she's a lot better now. She's doing really good now.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
she's doing triathlons at quite a high level now.
Wow.
So
That's amazing. That's a great inspiring story. That's really brilliant. Yeah.
yeah,
And very heartwarming. Yeah.
it
Great
is.
stuff.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
unfortunately, a good percentage of obviously working with cancer patients,
Mm,
doesn't end with a good outcome necessarily.
I
So
know. I know. Yeah, exactly. Oh no, yeah, thanks for sharing that story. Yeah. Wow. And a lot of people, that are listening, might not be hypnotherapists or
yeah.
around hypnosis. So, what's the main misconceptions you get from people, and how do you alleviate them myths that you might get from people?
Yeah,
Sorry.
I sort of, as part of my pre-talk, really,
Hmm.
I say that hypnotherapy is not what you think it is. I say at the most basic level, it's getting you to imagine stuff differently, because your unconscious doesn't know the difference between real and imagined. The reason you have problems is because your unconscious mind is imagining stuff wrongly. And so hypnotherapy is getting you to imagine it differently. And as part of my pre-talk, I say, well, I said, if somebody finds out I'm a hypnotist or a hypnotherapist, there's four phrases I hear here in order. I said, number one is, have you got a swinging watch? Number two, I've seen it on TV where you make people do stupid things. Is that real? Can you do that? Number three, can you really make me stop smoking? And number four, bet you can't hypnotize me. And I go on to explain that the first thing is I say, well, yes, I have got a swinging watch, and I take it to talks where people don't know what I do. I swing it, say, guess what I do for a living? And they say, oh, you're a hypnotist. And I say, how you guess? And they said, because you've got a hypnotist watch. And I said, I haven't because we don't use them. And the idea of a hypnotist with a swinging watch came from a Victorian Gothic horror novel and has no basis in reality whatsoever. And then I point out that so you've been conditioned to accept that as being real, and it isn't. And there's lots of things you're conditioned to accept as being real that are not. If you're frightened of spiders, you've been conditioned to accept a spider as being frightening when it isn't. So you're conditioned to accept things that are wrong. And our job is to get you to imagine those stuff differently so the problem goes away. I mentioned about stage hypnosis. That only works with a small percent of the population, and people are very sort of tested carefully and so on, tested and work with a specific way of doing it. I then go on to sort of explain that it might be a numbers game, for example. You know, if you do it with enough people, it'll work. I think there's a nice story that Darren Brown is shown on a TV show going up to somebody in the street and sort of going to sleep and putting them straight under. And I was at a conference that Darren was also speaking at a few years ago, and that was mentioned. You know, was it a genuine person? Had they been worked with? Had they been tested? And they said, no, it's a totally random person. And I think it was something like the 84 that I did that didn't work, didn't get shown on TV. So again, it's just a
Brilliant. Yeah.
numbers game. I
Yeah.
mentioned that no, we can't make people do anything. Only they can make them do stuff, but we can help reprogram their mind, uncover stuff that might be affecting them, challenge their perceptions. And when they say, can everybody be hypnotized? I say, well, yeah, because it's not stage hypnosis. And I say that all hypnosis is self hypnosis, and I
Mhm.
teach you what to do, and you follow the instructions, you can do it. And they say, can everybody do it? And I would say, yes. I mean, I've done over 10,000 sessions. I've had one failure. And I think that was a very valid failure. The person I saw was a recently retired fighter pilot who'd had all the Black Ops training in case they were shot down and psychologically interrogated. And they were fighting against absolutely everything I was trying to do. And I found out then that serving Air Force personnel are actually forbidden to consult hypnotherapists, which was quite interesting. So,
Mhm.
so I tend to go on that and also get rid of some of the myths. Because I say that you know, every people think you need to be in a darkened room, quiet, relaxed. Not true. If I'm working with sports performance, I might do it in a gym when they're on an exercise machine. They're in the zone, but they're not relaxed. Um, I work in a hospital, so it's certainly not a quiet environment. It's very noisy. So again, you don't need to be laid down. You don't need it quiet. Doesn't darken room. And a good example of that was at a conference I was at a couple of years ago. In fact, it was actually at the Irish conference a couple of years ago, and we were actually at an Irish music bar down in town, like you would be. And on the Friday afternoon, it was before it became a 3 day conference. It was absolutely packed out. There was a band playing, and a hen party came in, and the bride had a panic attack. I don't know what caused it, but she had a panic attack. And I went up to her and said, "Oh, I'm a hypnotherapist. Would you like me to help you get over your panic attack?" And she said, "Yes, please." And I've actually got a video. I need to put it on my social media. And but I actually did a session with her, standing up, being jostled in a packed bar with an Irish band playing, and still managed to solve the problem. So the
Yeah.
idea about, you know, laying down, quiet room, and relaxation are complete and utter rubbish if you know what you're doing.
I
So
got rid
so
of that myth very quickly.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
everybody can be hypnotized to that extent, you know,
Hmm.
to do the stay to do therapeutic stuff. That's the main thing. And I do apologize if you keep hearing buzzing
It's
in
okay.
the background. My doctors keep threatening me. They think I've got high blood pressure, and it's still undecided. But I've got a thing attached to me today to
Mhm.
measure my blood pressure for 24 hours about every 10 minutes, which is very annoying.
Yeah. Just a tad annoying on that one. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, very.
Yeah.
Especially when it's going to go on all night.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I was going to ask you as well. Like I've done your parts
Hmm.
course, which is really really good. I definitely recommend anybody. I'll share a link to it if that's okay in the show notes as well.
Yeah,
For
absolutely.
people to take up this. It's really really good. But what would you use that in? What main ways would you use this? Would you use this in pretty much anything? The
I would,
parts
yeah,
negotiation.
yeah. I do it. It's although it's parts therapy, it's sort of
Yeah.
a cross between
Hmm.
parts therapy and ego state,
Yeah.
but it's done in a very authoritarian manner. And
Hmm.
the reason I devised that was particularly in hospital, I don't get a lot of time, so
Yeah.
I needed and if you do traditional parts therapy, there's lots of parts negotiation. It can get quite complicated. There's stuff going on
Yeah.
all over the place, and it can be very time consuming. So I decided I needed a timed version that I could control. So I've done this, which is very authoritarian. I know how long it's going to take, and the real key is in the pre-talk, so it doesn't give the patient or the client any wriggle room. I know I'm totally in control with the session. I know exactly how it's going to go. But yeah, I use it with pretty much most things that I work with, because the idea of it is and the way I explain it to people is I say that, okay, you've got a problem. or an issue, whether it's a fear or a phobia or trying to lose weight. And I said that there will be parts of your unconscious that believe that that behavior or feeling or thought or issue is useful, normal, or desirable in some way. And I said, what we're going to do is find out the part or parts that think it's useful, normal, or desirable in some way and challenge them to be aligned with how you want to be going forward now. And one of the ways that I explain it, for example, I say, it might be carrying out something that was useful at one point in time, but no longer is. One of the examples, I said, well, let's imagine I'm working with somebody for weight loss. They've probably got a bad relationship with food. They do things like eating when they're bored, eating when they're stressed, eating for comfort. And I say, well, let's take a comfort eater. And I say, it doesn't work like this. It's just an analogy, a model, if you like. But I said, imagine that your mind is divided up into lots of little parts, and every little part has a role to play in your life, but it's blinkered. It doesn't know a great deal about you or the other parts, but it's going to do its job well. So let's say we've had somebody having a miserable week at work. So they're feeling miserable. So the miserable part's working. It makes them feel depressed and tearful because that's what it does. And they might think, oh, Friday afternoon, I don't want to feel miserable anymore. I want to feel happier. So the miserable part says, okay, they want to feel happy. They need comforting in some way. That's not my job. I'll send a message to the comfort part. The comfort part gets the message and it thinks, okay, what can I do to make them feel better? And it will go through any previous experience and so on. And it might use the senses and it'll think, oh, there's a bar of chocolate. Eat that. See what that does. So they'll eat the bar of chocolate, kicks off feel good chemicals in the brain, so they feel better. So the comfort part says, I know, every time they want to feel happy, a bar of chocolate, problem sorted. Next time, gets the message, person wants to feel happier. It says, I know, bar of chocolate. Oh, there isn't one. Oh, now there's a cake. It's not chocolate, but it's eating. Let's try that. So they might eat that and get a sugar rush. Over the years, we got a whole database, packet crisps, glass of wine, sweets, ice cream. So it's got a whole database now of things that makes the person feel better, happier, gives them comfort. And that's very nice. But now, if that person is very obese and struggling to lose weight, the last thing they want to do is having cake, sweets, chocolates every time they want to feel happier. But of course, the unconscious as a whole, if you like, doesn't know that the comfort part doesn't know they're obese. It thinks it's doing a blinding job, where it's now actually aiding to the problem. So what we do is with my version of that is we say to the unconscious as a whole, this person has a problem, they're overweight. Are any parts of the unconscious or the mind fighting against what they actually want to achieve? At that point, you'll get the comfort part will pop up and say, yes, I am, I didn't realize. And then you would challenge that part to now change its behavior or take a rest, but to basically change its behavior to be aligned with how the person wants to be going forward. And that's so again, you can use it for anything for sort of, things like weight loss, fears, phobias, all sorts of things. It's one of my go-to techniques because it's very powerful and I can control the session very well with it and time control it as well.
No, it's amazing, really, really good. And I love the pre-talk as well. You even mentioned that it's so important, the pre-talk, isn't it?
The pre-talk actually is the secret of the session because
Yeah.
basically the pre-talk is actually getting the patient or the client exactly where you want them, explaining
Mm.
exactly what's going to happen. So you get the anticipation and compliance already because you've given them that. But also I do it in such a way that it can't fail. Because
Yeah.
there is some things do go wrong, they don't work. So you have to go down plan B, C, and D, but that's already roped into the pre-talk so that I know exactly where the session's going and can control it.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's really good because and would you use that like in your oncology sessions as well? Was that something that you'd go to with that?
Yes, yes, very
Yeah,
frequently.
yeah,
And in fact, the reason I did that course, I actually teach it as one of the main techniques in my hypno-oncology course. But
right,
because I use it with a lot of things, and a lot of people sort of use it, a lot of people have asked for it as a standalone, which is why I decided to do it separately.
yeah,
But yeah, I would certainly use it with any fears and phobias of people going through the journey, and I would typically use it for side effects of treatment. That is probably the most common thing that I work with oncology patients.
yeah, yeah. No, it's an amazing technique. Thanks very much for sharing it. And can I just ask you? You did mention on the conference as well that sticks in my mind. You were working with somebody kind of age regression when you brought them back to a previous life. I don't know if anybody believes in that, but I don't know if it's happening or not. The jury's out on that one for me anyway. But maybe could you maybe just explain that one for people that are listening? I just think it's a really good story.
Yeah,
Where do you
it
remember the one I'm
was.
talking about?
Yeah, it's also
Yeah,
the saddest and hardest
it's
case I think I've ever
very sad.
worked.
Yeah, yeah,
And yeah, as you say, past life regression. I come from a science background.
Yeah.
Now, I actually attended a conference over the weekend where I didn't speak at, which is unusual, but it's local to me.
Yeah.
But it was quite a spiritual based one, and we had actually a long lecture on somebody who's very much into doing past lives and spirit releasing and all sorts of things. Now, I know there's a great belief in that, and by a lot of people, and one could argue from a scientific base, religion has a very good number of people believing it, but scientifically, does it stack up? That's not my
Yeah.
place to say.
Yeah.
I work with belief systems, so if the person sitting in front of me believes it, it's real to them. Doesn't matter what I
Yeah.
think, it's real to them. So
Brilliant. Yeah.
therefore, I accept it as being real. Um, Now, the other problem you have with things like past life sessions, particularly when I'm doing work in hospital, that's the sort of thing that if you work in hospital and you say, "Oh, I'm going to have one of the cancer patients in hospital. I'm going to do a past life regression session with them." You're going to be out the door so quick, you won't know what's hit you. But there are ways around it, and one of the things I said, sort of humorously, the thing is you have to put something on the intake form and the treatment forms that you can get away with. Now, if I put past life regression or anything else that, if you like, is new age, I would get shot. So
Yeah.
the lovely phrase I always tend to put down on hospital forms is, I utilised a metaphorical storytelling technique to process the patient's narrative, and then you can do a
Brilliant.
past life regression. And
Brilliant. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and this one was an incredibly sad case, and I hadn't planned to do a past life regression. It's not something that I would
Yeah.
do typically in hospital anyway, or with any other client that I see, because I'm
Yeah.
of scientific background. But the bit behind it was actually very sad. And normally the worst thing I hear at hospital is, is we booked a patient in for you. The counsellors think it's a good idea. That normally means that they've got a patient. The counsellors have worked with them for weeks or months, have got absolutely no idea what to do with them. So they think, oh, well, bung them on the hypnotherapist, get rid of them. So it was one of those, and they're normally quite complex or difficult, because obviously that's why they want to get rid of them. So anyway, I went into to this lady, and I said, "Oh, what would you like me to help you with?" And she said, "I've got no idea," which again is always a good start to a session. And she said, "Can I tell you my story, and we'll go from there?" And it was one of the most horrendous stories I've ever come across. I remember the lady was 29 years of age, and she said to me, she said, "I'm 29 years of age. She said the last 4 or 5 years of my life have been absolute hell." She said, "My husband left me for my best friend." She said, "My two small children were killed in a hit and run accident." She said, "I'd worked for the same company since I left school. They've gone bust. They owe me several months' money, and I'm struggling to pay my rent. And I've now been diagnosed with terminal cancer." And I thought that's pretty heavy duty. And I said,
Yeah.
"Well, do you want me to help you come to terms with all that?" And she said no. She said, "I'm very pragmatic." She said, "I know I can't change anything." She said, "So there's no point in me worrying about that," and so on. She said, "I get very angry. Why me?" But she said, "I know that's normal." Uh, so she said, I've accepted that as well. And I said, "Well, what would you like me to help you with?" And she said, "Well, it sounds really strange, but she said, I keep getting this overwhelming feeling that there's something I need to understand." And she said, "Whatever it is," she said, "I've got no idea what it is, but she said, well, whatever it is if I understood it, everything would make sense." And she said, "That's what I want you to help me with." And I thought, I've got no idea what we're going to do, where we're going to go. So I started off with IMR, idiomotor response techniques. And for people that aren't hypnotherapists or don't know, it's a way of communicating with the unconscious mind, if you want to call it the unconscious mind. And normally, the way I do it is using small finger movements. So the
Yeah.
idea is you can set up the mind to give yes no answers to questions, unconsciously. So I set up this with her, and was asking questions, and some of the questions were, well, is there something she needs to understand? And I was getting very strong yeses, and I was asking all sorts of questions because I was trying to guess, well, what type of thing did she need to understand? And I was getting absolutely nothing. So eventually I thought, well, let's go a little bit off track. And as I mentioned in one of my talks, thinking outside the box sometimes you have to do. And so I started going down the new age road of, asking that. And one of the questions I eventually asked, because I was running out of ideas, was, "Is there something relevant to a past life?" And I got a very powerful yes. So I thought, okay, this is where we need to go. So I did a past life with her. Uh, Now, when she went back into this alleged past life, her demeanor changed very, very drastically. She was very loud, very aggressive. quite nasty. But she told me that in the past life, she'd gone back to the same age. She was 29 years of age, but she was a man, she was a male. And it turned out, again, allegedly in this past life, it turned out that the person she was in this past life, the 29-year-old male, was a mass murderer. There was a mass murderer and had no conscience or qualms about anything he'd done. They just, no, that's what I did. That's what I do. I haven't got a problem with that. So anyway, so we did some work on dealing with that and processing stuff that had gone on in that life. Then we finished the session, and we finished the session. We both seemed to be quiet for what seemed to be an absolute age. We were both absolutely gobsmacked, sitting there quiet. Then she burst into tears, which again was fairly understandable. And then the bit that I still find very emotional, she got up and hugged me really tight. And she said, "Thank you, thank you." She said, "I understand everything now." She said, "I'm paying for what I did before, and I can accept that." And she died not long afterwards. So that was really a way of helping somebody, not in the way that you would normally think you would help somebody as a hypnotherapist. Now, I don't know whether that was real as a past life or whether it was a metaphorical story that her unconscious was making up to assist. But
Yeah.
whatever it was, that gave her the peace that she needed, and she was able to die in peace, in her mind, knowing the answer.
Yeah, she
But
got closure, yeah.
it was a very tough session,
Oh
believe
my
me.
God. Really, really sad, yeah. Shame. Yeah. And I know you mentioned one as well. How would you deal with like would you use the same method like of the parts and the blueprint the blueprint NLP? Would you
Hmm.
use that with smokers as well? Would you use that
I
with
do, yeah, I do.
yeah,
That's a big part of my smoking cessation.
yeah, yeah,
My smoking cessation again. I do a lot of psychological stories. There's about 5 psychological stories I give them to challenge their perception to the way they think about smoking, and really throw them out of the idea of how they think about smoking. And then I use hypnotic suggestion, but I do two lots of suggestion. One is reprogramming, the other is aversion. And then I would do parts, which parts of you want you to smoke and get satisfaction from it. And then once we've dealt with that, which parts there, then we move on to sort of NLP based stuff, forward pacing and that rehearsal and that type of thing.
And would you have a recent example of somebody you work with that was successful who quit smoking? Because that's a big one. I know everybody goes to hypnotist
Yeah, I
for
mean,
smoking.
I
That's a
did.
big thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I did
Yeah.
one a couple of weeks ago, and
Mm.
somebody had been smoking for about 35 years, smoking and vaping. Had done less smoking, gone on to vaping. And again,
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
we did the
Mm.
suggestion, both lots of suggestion. Again, did all the basic stuff, the challenge their perceptions around things. And I mentioned I give lots of psychological stories. I mean, one of the ones that I give to give an idea of challenging perception, and it works really well if the person has got say a daughter who's in sort of early 20s or something like that. It's then very effective. And and I say, so for example, I said, let's imagine a scenario with your daughter, and what does she do for work, and they'll tell me, and I say, well, okay, so let's imagine your daughter. She's left home now. She worked really hard, long hours. She's bought her first flat. She's got her first flat, struggling with money because it's taking a lot of her money, and she's just got a new boyfriend. But boyfriend's a bit of a nasty piece of work. He's moved in with her. He doesn't work. He's got no money, so he moves in with her. Doesn't do any work, so he's living there free. He's sponging off her, so taking her money. And I said, but he also bashes her about a bit. What would your thoughts be on that? And you can see the hackles rising. Well, that's outrageous. Domestic violence, domestic violence, that sort of relationship, abusive relationship. I'd have him. I'll sort him out, and and so on. And I say, okay, that's brilliant. And then I turn around and say, well, why are you living in an abusive relationship? And they said, what do you mean? And I said, cigarettes. I said, you're giving them somewhere free to live. They're taking your money and they're
Yeah.
harming
Yeah.
you. What's the
Yeah.
difference?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, just really trying to throw it on the head, the way they're
Right.
thinking about it. So I've got quite a few like that to really challenge their perception. And yeah, so this one recently, yeah, again I did that, and again, yeah, it was I think the parts were boredom. Was the main one, sort of boredom and habit. So again, you dealt with those parts, did the two lots of suggestion, it was fine. Yeah.
Great stuff. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, because and what's the difference is, if you're dealing with somebody with vaping, because vaping is a big problem at the moment. Yeah,
It
so
is. It's
yeah,
becoming more
yeah,
and more common, and
yeah,
I think it's going back to how smoking was. Everybody initially
mm,
thought, "Oh, this is safe, we can do that," but no,
yeah,
the things explode. There's popcorn lung. There's all sorts of nasty chemicals in it. So, you
yeah,
know, and again, some of it is addictive with the nicotine and stuff in it. So there are subtle differences, but I generally use a very similar process for
yeah.
working with it.
Yeah, that's great. Yes, listen, I really appreciate coming on today, Gary. And is there anything else that you'd like to say you have coming up there in the next while that people that might be interested in doing? Like, I know you mentioned the hypno-oncology. How can people just look at your website and get the links? Is it?
Yeah, I mean, for particularly for hypnotherapists, I mean, obviously for people going through the cancer journey,
Yeah,
I do teach doctors and hypnotherapists all around the world to
yeah,
assist you with going through the journey. And it is the whole journey. When people say, "What do we do with cancer patients?" I say, "Well, I work with you, or people I've trained will work with you from initial diagnosis, fears, anxiety, stress, panic. We would then deal with any fears and phobias. You might be frightened of scanners, needles, pre and post surgical work. With having pre surgical hypnosis, you have a faster recovery quality. We work with side effects of treatment, pain control, palliative care, an area called psychoneuroimmunology, which is working with the immune system, and all sorts of other things. So, I mean, so general public, if somebody is going through the cancer journey, I work with clients all around the world. I've got a guy I'm working with later in Boston in the US, and I'm UK based. So we can work wherever you are in the world, helping you through your journey. But for hypnotherapists, and again, you can find me through the website hypno-oncology.com. But for hypnotherapists, I do online, well, I do training. I do the parts therapy training, which you've done, which is
yeah,
online. That's also part of the hypno-oncology training, which is available as a pre-recorded one online. It's also available with lots and lots of extras and demos on a USB card. Um, I do some live trainings, as I mentioned before we came on. I'm actually training this weekend medical staff in Poland, in Warsaw, and I might be doing one in Canada later in the year. Um, but I also, the other things, there's also a script book for hypnotherapists on oncology. And for general hypnotherapy, I do actually run a monthly mentoring session, which is normally the last Monday of the month. It's been going, this is its third year. Anybody that joins up gets access to the recordings of the past 2 years. So they will get basically 36 hours of mentoring. But it's not just me, because I've had people saying, "Oh, I'd like to do this topic, and so on." Because I'm very lucky, I do lots of conferences around the world that I've been doing for the last decade. So I know a lot of the top people from around the world that are experts on different subjects. So rather than me lecturing on it, I will find an expert. I mean, for example, somebody was talking about past life regression. So my guest for that was a Hungarian doctor who specializes in researching that. We did something about not visualizing. So I had a doctor from Scotland to come on and talk about aphantasia. One of the most amusing ones I think I had on, and sadly he's no longer with us. But it was the Ellmans, Larry and Cheryl Ellman,
yeah,
because people
yeah.
said, "Oh, can you teach us about doing inductions online?" I thought, well, who better to get to do inductions online than the Ellman induction? If we're going to do the Ellman induction, I'll get the Ellmans to do it.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
so we have a lot of top guests on. So that's available if people want to sign up from that. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So, but
That's
that's
great, Gary. Well done for all your brilliant
hypno-oncology.com
work.
site. Yeah,
Yeah, well done for all your excellent work.
thank
And
you.
just one last question that I was thinking of as well, for when you're doing the parts online, when you're doing it online with somebody, is it a bit different? Because I did do that with somebody recently, the way when you're putting the hand.
Yeah.
Would you modify that in some way, or what's the best
Yeah,
way?
when I'm doing it in person, with the
Yeah,
person's in front of me, I
yeah,
tend to like to use more of the senses. So in my induction, I would probably do sort of pick up one of the hands by the wrist and shake it around and drop it,
yeah,
which
yeah,
obviously you can't do online.
yeah,
I
yeah.
would obviously do sort of eye movement and fixation and things like that.
Mm,
But then you need to be mindful. I mean, things like arm drops and things like that, they get a bit funny if you do that in America. They don't, a lot of people in America don't like you touching them. So,
yeah,
and the idea really was I was doing it in person, before I really did a huge amount sort of with it online. And then we had COVID, and I thought, well, I can't go and pick up hands and get close to people in COVID. And again, I like to do this sort of as part of my validation. I do an eye lock. And I like to do that by touching them on the forehead. I might like to do something by clicking and tapping them and various things like that. Well, you couldn't do that in COVID. They don't like it in America. And I thought, well, I can't do that online. So I've tried to modify as much as I can, which is things like touching the screen. To me, it's the online version of going up and touch them on the forehead.
Very
So
good.
we're
Very
just
good.
trying to
Yeah.
adapt it slightly.
No, that's great. Thanks very much for that. Okay, Gary, thanks very much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much, and
And
hopefully I'll get to see you in Ireland again next year.
yeah, and I'll share all your links to your stuff for your website so you have it in the background. But make sure you
It is,
check
yeah.
out all.
But if I
Yeah,
duck down, there you go, so you can see it at
great.
hypno-oncology.com. And there are pages on there. I think there's one called mentoring. There's a page called mentoring. I think there's a page called online, and there's a page called products. And between those, that has all the books, the trainings, and so on. And obviously, there's a form to contact me for there if any sort of members of the public want help. Or look out for what you can see in the background, the Association of Hypno-Oncology Practitioners. If you see that logo anywhere, people are advertising it. It means they've trained with me in hypno-oncology stuff, and can help you anyway if you want to sort of see somebody in your part of the world, right, in person rather than online.
Great. Okay, thanks again, Gary. Thanks
All
for
right.
listening as well and watching on YouTube. So join us again for another podcast very shortly. Thanks again for listening. Take care. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.